Hi, my name is Zesska Harder, and I'm here to show my presentation called Spread the Love for IAP 480. Quick little note, viewers' discretion is advised as there are depictions of violence in this presentation. We live in a country that views violence as power, and this has polarized our social climate. Polarizing views have led to more violence and more separation. A few examples of fairly recent events of violence that have polarized our climate. One is the Trump supporters storming the Capitol. This mob of angry individuals felt like the only way to get their voices heard or to evoke their power over a situation that they felt was unjust was through violence. In recent events, the assassination of Charlie Kirk, also a very violent action taken by a man who has very controversial views. His speaking up and his just talking about his viewpoints that were controversial led to his own death. It is not okay for us to use violence in order to make change in the world. And of course, we have school shootings. This is a depiction of the Columbine shooting, which was a shooting that happened when I was back in high school. These are some of the victims of that shooting, and I feel like as I was not part of that particular school, but I did have a direct high school experience that was affected by this because my school was closed down for bomb threats, and many of the other schools in my area also. We have to ask ourselves the question, why do Americans love violence so much? When we look back in our history, see that the foundation of this country began with violence. First, our violently stealing the country from the native people, and then violently taking it from the British just after. In addition to our history and the foundations of this country starting in a very violent way, we've also allowed violence to have this portrayal of heroic action. And we see heroes in our pop culture like Superman and Batman that they're fighting in a heroic way. And when we portray violence as heroic, then we're saying that violence is okay when it's done in the name of justice and when it's done for a heroic act. But if we see in our own history, the dropping of the atomic bomb, which in American history is sometimes seen as heroic, as it did lead to the end of World War II. But what it also did, it also is a major attack on innocent bystanders, individuals who had nothing to do with the war, just by living in a country whose leaders chose to fight, leaders chose to act in violence. Children, women, individuals who had nothing to do with the war were violently attacked in that. Violence is just, their violent power grabs have allowed elitist groups to maintain a false sense of power. And I think this is another reason why violence is so seductive. And we see it in our own history. We see the white man overpowering all the African Americans in this country through slavery and using slavery, trying to maintain that in order to maintain their power. But if we really want to look at who holds true power, it's the individuals who are able to change hearts and minds. And when we act with violence, we're absolutely not changing hearts and minds. We've been taught that the way to change the world is through violence, and we see this in our political realm, going out and protesting in with violence and aggressive actions. And the violence comes from both sides, but no one ever wins. We all lose with violence. There are some leaders that we can look to who have led with love, and they have won. One is Martin Luther King Jr., who said that love is the only force capable of transforming an enemy into a friend. Now, that is true power, to be able to transform an enemy into a friend rather than just forcing your views onto another person. We need to change the narrative about what power looks like in this country. We need to change the narrative that power comes from violence. We need to change the narrative and allow people to see that true power comes from love and compassion and the ability to change hearts and minds. Martin Luther King Jr. said that darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that. And so my project is focused on that very point. How can we change hearts and minds? How can we find more connection within this polarizing environment? And that is like through spreading love. There's one object that has been a staple in showing love through empathy and compassion. That is flowers. And so I'm going to be using flowers as the main visual in this project in order to portray the power of like love and compassion and empathy. And if we think about flowers and the power that they possess, they are given in moments when we apologize. We show that we want to make things right. They are given when we fall in love and you say things like, "You light up my world." They are there at our biggest moments of our lives, at our weddings to represent a long lifetime of love. They're there at funerals to represent the compassion, grief, and care. Flowers have the power to speak words that sometimes are too hard for us to say ourselves. With this art project, I'm not just asking the viewer to look, I'm asking the viewer to become part of the creation process. And the way in which I'm asking them, I'm going to be asking individuals to create origami flowers. I'm asking them to create one origami flower to be left within the sculpture, and then also to take one flower with them. The flower that they take with them is to be given to someone within their life that has very different views than them, but they still love and cherish. And so I imagine a project similar to this visual where there's like larger scale paper flowers kind of hovering above a whole bunch of different pots, and the pots will be filled with the origami flowers. There will also be like a little board of instructions along with a whole bunch of paper that's pre-cut to the correct size for the flowers, and inviting the viewer, come here, create a flower, leave that love that you've like created within that flower for someone else to give, and take the flower that someone else has made. And my hope is that fractured relationships, this might be like a point where fractured relationships can have some sort of healing or coming back together. And that through this symbol of love and compassion and empathy, the flower, and also not just a normal flower, but a flower that is actually made from like another human. And that when that gift is given to another, it can maybe start a conversation of people joining together that have different views. This is my hope for this project. Thank you so much for listening.